10 days out, and this time, unless something or someone gives, no-deal Brexit, here we come.
The noes were 276. So the noes have it. In respect of Mr. Nicholas Bowles' motion D, Common Market 2.0, the ayes were 261.
The UK Parliament offering itself a second chance to seize the initiative on Brexit Monday, and although some of the indicative votes were close, all the night could muster was a quartet of noes. That's a reflection of a nation where parties, communities, families are divided. No wonder Britain is ruled by a minority government that is split in two over its interpretation of the mandate from the people to deliver a divorce deal with the European Union. So why not clear the air with a general election? Would it really deliver another hung parliament? Meanwhile, with 8 days to go before the UK could crash out of the EU without a deal, with 10 days to go rather, the Prime Minister soldiers on with a mission that's a lot about keeping the Conservative Party that she's devoted her life to from crumbling. She's reached out now to Jeremy Corbyn to try to find common ground. At this point, we on the continent are we reduced to spectators as the Irish Prime Minister visits Paris? What response to Brexiteers who begrudge Europe for insisting that the UK's only land border with the EU remain open? What way forward? Today in the France 24 debate, we're looking at the fact that it's 10 days out and we need to sort it fast to avoid a no-deal Brexit. Joining us from London, Michael Northcott, editorial director of Mulberry Media. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Freelance journalist Sam Bradpeace is with us as well. How are you?
I'm well, thank you.
With us, economist Catherine Mathieu of the OFCE think tank.
Good evening.
You ready for no-deal Brexit?
As an economist, we have been considering a number of scenarios, so I would say we are ready for it.
We'll talk about those scenarios. John Linden, European Director of ALMEP. Now, your remit is to talk about the Middle East. Mm-hmm. Here, it's a reminder, though, this whole process that involved in the Brexit negotiations is a peace plan, that between the two Irelands. And we'll be talking more about that a little bit later on. Many thanks for joining us. The France 24 debate on Facebook and Twitter, hashtag F24debate. It's entirely up to the UK to avoid a hard Brexit, so says France's president, who welcomed the Irish Prime Minister, Leo Varadkar, who Thursday will host Angela Merkel in Berlin. Both of them saying they're preparing for a no-deal Brexit and, well, trying to move on.
It's very much the case that the United Kingdom at the moment is consumed by Brexit, but Ireland and France and the European Union shouldn't be consumed by Brexit. We have a very positive, forward-looking agenda for the European Union, which we want to deliver.
The UK will remain a friend and an essential ally, but we cannot spend the coming months sorting out the terms of our divorce and arguing over our past.
Can the EU move on, Catherine Mathieu?
At the moment, I would say that the EU expect the UK to move on and to make a decision. And so I'm not sure the European Union is going to change his rather tough position as of now until, at least until there is no hope that anything changes on the UK.
Which brings us to what the Prime Minister has said after more than 7 hours of grueling meetings with her cabinet. The Prime Minister offering to sit down with the leader of the opposition to work out a plan. Michael Northcott, your thoughts on how that's going to go?
Well, I think it's something that Corbyn's been calling for a long time. Obviously, it's not the exact form that he was calling for. He wanted cross-party cooperation on the formation of the plan a lot earlier than this point. But I think, I think that given the deadlock, I think it's probably a positive step forward. As for how it'll work out, it depends really how hard and fast May is sort of stuck on her red lines that she's set out. So I know that Corbyn he had this impression that he would be able to negotiate a better deal, even though, as you said in the introduction, the EU are pretty stuck on the withdrawal agreement that they've agreed. So I think it's like so much of the Brexit argument and debate, is completely up in the air. We'll have to see how the first day of meetings between
and
May
what do you think of her plan,
Corbyn goes.
saying we'll have, if we can't agree together, Theresa May and Jeremy Corbyn, if we can't agree on a unified plan, then we'll have these votes that the government would abide by in Parliament. How will that work?
It's a repeat, really, of the indicative votes saga that we've been watching unfold for the last few weeks, isn't it? It's not a new tactic or technique for getting through the impasse. It's just bringing Corbyn in to try and have an effect where they rally the troops on each side of their sides of the aisle. But I can't see it being more effective unless somehow they manage to whip all of the rival factions inside their own parties too.
Unless they manage to whip the rival factions inside of their own parties. Sam Bradpiece?
Yeah.
I can sense a tinge of skepticism in Michael Northcott's voice there when it comes to that.
I mean, perhaps. I think the reality is Theresa May has to reach across the House because her party is so hopelessly divided with this whole Brexit situation. I think without Labour on side, there's no way she's passing any deal through Parliament, and I think that's just the reality of it. So I think I actually agree with you. I think it's about time that these talks took place, and I hope that there's some kind of progression.
We've talked at length about the divisions within the Conservative Party. I want to mention that it's not just the Conservatives that have issues. Among the 4 indicative votes that were rejected Monday evening, a call for a second referendum to approve a final deal. Now, here you see how different MPs voted. The red dots are Labour Party members. Labour told its party members to vote yes for a second referendum. 40 members of Parliament from the Labour Party either voted no or abstained, and the motion failed by just 12 votes.
Yeah, I mean that is a sign of a party split over Brexit, as they both are. In fact, I mean,
why so many dissensions within the Labour Party for a second referendum? Do you think Labour would be all for that?
A lot of Labour seats are in Brexit heartlands, so there is a certain electoral pressure to stick to their guns and to support Brexit through the House. I think that's basically what it comes down to, and I think that's also why Jeremy Corbyn hasn't been pro-EU very vocally from the start. It's because he's had to play to this wing of his party, which is based in these very pro-Brexit constituencies. There's a big, we talk about in Britain about this big divide between the kind of liberal metropolitan elite Labour voter and the kind of the Midlands, Northern England Labour voter, as two quite different demographics in terms of how they view Brexit.
Michael Northcott, if you were a betting man, which would you say has a bigger chance of implosion right now, the Conservatives or Labour?
Definitely the Conservatives. I think the saying goes of something along the lines of parties don't win power, governments lose it. And I think the warring inside the Conservatives is going to be fatal unless it's resolved at some point soon. So Labour will, I think, just about manage to hold on to something that looks a little bit like a united front against Theresa May and the Conservatives. But unless May can get us through this without having to go to resolve to use that election, then yeah, it'll be the Conservatives that would implode first. That's my bet.
I think we need to remember that this whole the place we're in now is a direct result of this division within the Conservative Party to begin with. When David Cameron called the referendum, it was to appease this kind of super Eurosceptic wing of the party.
But isn't that ancient history now? I mean, that was 2016. Let's.
But no, I mean, the reason we're not getting anywhere, I think ultimately still lies with the Conservative Party. I think that there's no clear vision of what Brexit should look like. And I don't see this problem going away until Brexit has happened. Right, and even then, who knows?
Last week, the cliff edge seemed to be falling off the horizon with Parliament extending Brexit date April 12th, compromises on the cards, the lawmakers seizing the initiative with those indicative votes. Now, though, that April 12th date is squarely back in focus. Owen Barnell has more.
Another night of drama in Westminster, and another where very little was achieved.
This is now the second time the House has considered a wide variety of options for a way forward. It has once again failed to find a clear majority for any of the options. This House has continuously rejected leaving without a deal, just as it has rejected not leaving at all.
Once again given the chance to vote on an alternative to Theresa May's deal, MPs failed to find any majority at all on any Brexit plan available. As the clock ticks down, it was one of the last chances for Parliament to have its say, and as the results came through, emotions ran high. Conservative MP Nick Bowles abandoned the Conservatives.
That I can no longer sit for this party.
Oh, Nick.
After his cross-party plan for a Common Market 2.0 was shut down. Labour had ordered its MPs to vote for the plan, but to no avail. Bowles' plan was binned along with Ken Clarke's option to stay in a customs union, one for a public vote on any deal, and one to revoke Article 50 in the face of a no deal.
If it's good enough for the Prime Minister to have 3 chances at her deal, then I suggest that possibly the House should have a chance to consider again the options that we had before us today in a debate on Wednesday.
April 12th is now the no-deal deadline. Theresa May can ask for a longer extension from the EU at an emergency summit on the 10th. After Monday's impasse on alternatives, could it be the last chance saloon for the Prime Minister's deal? Number 10 has not ruled out pushing the deal through the Commons for a 4th time.
And as we've just heard, John Linden, the Prime Minister now reaching out to Jeremy Corbyn. We've become suddenly, all of us, very versed in UK Parliament procedure. Your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think this is probably a move to try and put the locus back on the executive again. What we've seen in the last few weeks is a historic ebbing of power, really, from the executive to the Parliament, to the legislature. And I think making it about Theresa May sitting down with Jeremy Corbyn as a leader of the opposition allows her to drive the agenda. But again, it's a domestic political concern rather than trying to figure out a route that actually gets us out of this mess. And I think the thing is, the European Union were very clear. They wanted a timetable and a plan that could disrupt this situation, and an extension would be dependent upon it. I don't think that what's been laid out there, we obviously haven't had too much time to digest it, really represents a path towards answering this question. I think we're going to see ourselves in a similar
Okay, this is interesting. So we're into talking about the art of negotiating, the art of finding common ground, the art of finding compromise. From what you heard from the Prime Minister this Tuesday, what makes you sound like it's just more politicking?
Well, first of all, the incentives are all lined up in the wrong place. So Theresa May's primary concern has been up until now keeping the Conservative Party together. Actually negotiating a transformative Brexit deal with the leader of the Labour Party, who is the most left-wing leader of the Labour Party in decades, and who all Tories agree their number one priority is keeping out of government, would actually be an existential thing for Theresa May to do with regards to her own...
But that's what she says.
I wonder whether this is yet another technique trying to buy some more time until something else emerges. I also think the incentives for Jeremy Corbyn are quite interesting. As was pointed out, many of the seats that Labour seeks to win in the next election are in Brexit heartlands. I think any Brexit deal which can be framed as betraying the vote in 2016 could be an electoral liability. And I personally also have some questions about Jeremy Corbyn's own Remainer sort of characteristics and how sincere they are. So I think both party leaders are incentivised to kick the can down the road again. And we've seen the Prime Minister go on television and sketch out a plan which doesn't really get us.
Hang on, John, if I'm listening to you carefully, you're saying that it's hopeless because with the two-party system the way it is, both of these leaders will put party before country.
Yes, I think that's probably a fair analysis.
And there's nothing that can be done to find common ground.
Well, that's not true. I mean, I think what we need right now is a disruptive event, a general election or a second referendum or a people's vote that actually provides some sort of a conclusion. All we keep doing is arranging new processes, which are themselves subject to the same parliamentary mechanics that have us in this mess. And I think we need to rearrange things. And if you listen to what's coming from Michel Barnier, from President Macron today, from Taoiseach Varadkar, there's growing impatience where the European Union are being forced to almost digest the same dysfunction that you see in Westminster. And at some point, I think they're going to push back against that.
That stated impatience, is it grandstanding because you have to say that when you're Emmanuel Macron welcoming Leo Varadkar and you're the two nations that are the most directly impacted by Brexit?
I think it's sincere, certainly more sincere than most of what we hear in the House of Commons at the moment. And from the Irish perspective, I'm sure it's sincere, because on the island of Ireland, there are significant issues around security and peace and stability for a conflict that seemed to have been ended a generation ago that are directly associated with decisions being made right now. And as any Prime Minister in any democracy, your number one concern is the safety of your citizens. And that is directly linked to conversations taking place in Parliament, but also today at the Elysee and I think in Brussels over the next few days.
Catherine Mathieu, you agree those aren't just empty words we heard from the Elysee Palace earlier from Macron and Varadkar?
Yes, I agree, because I think especially on Macron's side, there is a rather tough view about the UK's process of leaving the European Union and saying, well, if the UK wants to leave, it leaves, but we are not going to be taken as hostages for months and months and months. And I think probably France is the toughest country currently in terms of negotiating with the UK, as compared to Germany, for instance, where Angela Merkel has always been more...
But is that a good cop, bad cop act? Between Merkel and Macron?
Yes.
And by the way, Merkel is going to be traveling to Dublin on Thursday.
Yes, but I think that more basically in Germany there is more the feeling of having a common economic interest between the UK and Germany and avoiding to have a hard Brexit, that in France, where probably we would tend to place the political element of the European Union.
But the stakes are much higher for France. We have a common defence agreement with the UK. We have the ports along the North Sea and English Channel coasts, which depend on trade with the UK.
Yes, that's true. But I think that even in the case of no deal, then the countries, the UK and France, for instance, would start to talk about having agreement so that trade can continue, so that transportation can continue. So I think anyway, we would try to find a solution on both sides of the channel. But this is maybe a bit too early in the process to go in that direction.
All right. John Linden talking about... Go ahead, Michael Northcott, briefly, because we're going to have to go to the break. Go ahead.
Sorry, I was just going to say, I think Macron has form in talking tough and then having to back down. I mean, the Article 50 thing we've now seen already, they have form in delaying that. So it's perfectly possible that they could delay it again. And for him to apply some verbal pressure is not the same as there being a legal requirement that we get something sorted as quickly as he wants us to. That's just one little insertion I wanted to make.
All right, an important one. When we come back, we're going to talk about those disruptive events that could happen between now and April of the 10th or 12th. Stay with us. You're watching the France 24 debate. Welcome back, or welcome if you're just joining us. It's the France 24 debate, and it's been another day of high drama at Westminster. The UK Prime Minister concluding more than 7 hours of meetings with her cabinet and issuing a statement that you heard here earlier here on France 24, where she offered to the opposition leaders to sit down to work out a plan, with the government then abiding by the results of votes if they don't have a unified approach. This with an eye to avoiding the UK having to take part in European elections. Also, we've had at the same time fresh motions put forth by MPs in the Commons to stave off a no-deal Brexit, which could happen in 10 days' time. With us from London, Michael Northcott, editorial director of Mulberry Media. We're also in the company of freelance journalist Sam Bradpeace, economist Catherine Mathieu, and John Linden, European director of AllMep, which works on Mideast peace, so about negotiating a lot of it.
That's right.
And finding common ground. Here's how the EU's, you talked just before the break, John, about you need some disruptive event. And it was spelled out clearly by the EU's chief negotiator earlier in the day.
Has already said that a long extension could be justified for 3 reasons. A new political process. I don't know what kind of process, but we will see, between the opposition and the majority. Second point would be organizing a new referendum. It is for the UK to decide. And the third one would be European election, national elections.
Michael Northcott, fresh elections. What do you think?
So I am very concerned about the notion of believing that a fresh election will result in any change in the situation that we already have. For a start, Jeremy Corbyn has lagged far behind Theresa May and the Conservatives at various points and during the negotiation process, and has only just made a sort of level-necking position. And I can't see that his offer to the electorate is actually materially different from what's already on the table. I mean, he's sort of said for a very long time, I think I could negotiate a better deal, when it's the European Union and Barnier and Tusk and everyone else have been saying consistently for months now, this withdrawal agreement is the only deal possible. So to go into an election with a campaign of, I think I could have done a marginally better job, is not very persuasive.
You agree with that, Samrat?
Well, I think the difference between a Labour majority government and a Conservative majority government, were an election to happen, is that you just don't have this hard Eurosceptic, hard Brexit side to Labour. There are Brexiteers, for sure.
We saw with that, with the illustrating of that vote on a second referendum where they don't agree amongst themselves.
Exactly, but I think as a broad church, Labour is now behind Brexit, but arguably a softer one than the one we're going to see with the Conservatives. So I think, and with a majority, which the Conservative government doesn't currently have.
You think that Labour would have a majority if there was an election?
I'm not sure. I would be optimistic.
And if there was a minority government, it would have to be
absolutely no way.
It would have to be what, in coalition with the Scottish Nationalists?
It would have to be in coalition with the SNP, who are very pro-EU.
But what would be the trade-off for the SNP joining that coalition?
I think a seat in power, which they're a long way off ever achieving up until this point in history. So I think political clout is what they could gain from it.
Just political clout, or demands for a second Scottish independence referendum?
I mean, if there's a demand for a second Scottish independence referendum, I personally wouldn't be against it. I'm not a Scottish nationalist, but I think for most people, the important thing now is Brexit. And I think that would predominate anything.
With the Conservatives so divided, why isn't Jeremy Corbyn crushing it? Why isn't he 20 points ahead in the polls?
It's an excellent question. It really is an excellent question. I think he's been very woolly on Brexit from the start, as I've already mentioned. I think a bold move might have been to have staked a firmer claim backing the European Union from the beginning. That might have seen him do well in previous elections. If he had pegged Labour as the pro-EU party, his fortunes might have been different. Because a lot of young people support Labour.
The problem with that, though, is the European Union he's been a lifelong Eurosceptic. He's voted as a backbencher. He voted down almost every single piece of EU-related legislation that came through the House of Commons. It's no secret amongst the old guard of Labour that Jeremy Corbyn is completely against the European Union in all its guises.
And at the same time, you can look at the Conservative Party, who voted through nearly every single EU treaty, the Lisbon Treaty, the Maastricht Treaty. It really is quite a paradoxical situation.
All right, and the Prime Minister, who's promised she'll step down once the question of Brexit is settled. Again, let's take a listen to Theresa May speaking a little bit earlier.
We will need a further extension of Article 50, one that is as short as possible and which ends when we pass a deal. And we need to be clear what such an extension is for, to ensure we leave in a timely and orderly way. This debate, this division, cannot drag on much longer.
Michael Northcott, listening to the UK Prime Minister, has she moved? Is there the sense of urgency in her voice?
I think Theresa May has arrived at several of these crunch points where she comes out in front of the podium to deliver some grave-sounding pronouncement. But I don't think tactically it's actually any different. I think she's unlikely to abandon all of her red lines at this late stage, not least because that won't have any impact on the withdrawal agreement as it stands, which can't be changed, as we know. No, I don't think it's if it sounds like a change of tone, I don't think it's a very sincere one. And I reserve judgment until I see the the press conference between them both after the first day of meetings.
And all this, again, is partly down to the fact that she'd called that snap election, which then did not go her way. Currently, the Conservatives beholden to the 10 seats in the UK Parliament of the Northern Irish DUP party.
Back in December of 2017, we warned about the dangers of the backstop. The Prime Minister made a call and went ahead in relation to that declaration. Then, of course, came last November the withdrawal agreement. We warned her before she signed that withdrawal agreement. We wrote to her, you will recall, in relation to all of these matters, but she decided to go ahead. We cannot sign up to something that would damage the union.
We're wondering whether Theresa May's red lines have shifted. Arlene Foster, that was her speaking last week. She remains, at least in speech, steadfast. She sounds ready to run the risk of there being a snap general election, doesn't she?
She does. I mean, the DUP aren't in the habit of publicly relenting on long-held positions. I mean, if the Tory hardliners think that they're hard, the DUP can definitely out-trump them.
Even if it means the potential of seeing a Jeremy Corbyn become Prime Minister, Corbyn who's been close to Sinn Féin in the past.
If they think the union is at risk, absolutely. They wouldn't mind if any citizen of the UK picked them out of a phone book is the Prime Minister as long as they get to retain the union. The question is our calculation about what endangers Northern Ireland remaining in the Union. And we did see one of Arlene Foster's colleagues this week come out and say that he would prefer Remain rather than the Prime Minister's deal. And you need to remember that the majority of people in Northern Ireland voted to remain in the European Union. And the DUP will have an eye on a future general election, but also if the institutions in Stormont resume, they've been suspended now for 2 years with direct rule coming directly from Westminster. If the DUP are left carrying some of the blame for an economic downturn, irrespective of what happens with regards to the details of a Brexit deal, Northern Ireland is the poorest region of the United Kingdom, and it will suffer the worst consequences of any economic downturn, and the DUP will have to turn to their electorate, having been in power, unlike any other actor in Northern Ireland, and having their hands on and sort of an implication of responsibility for whatever emerges.
And basically, I'll put this to Michael Northcott. Do UK parliamentarians kind of forget to a degree about Ireland once the DUP no longer has that leverage it currently holds?
I think certainly to some of the key players on the Brexit side of the argument, and I think of Boris Johnson and Jacob Rees-Mogg as key examples. It is not the philosophical problem of this border does not concern them as much as it really should. This is, an issue of peace and how to retain it, and this was hard won. So I think, if there was reduced influence from the DUP in some way, then it could very easily become a secondary concern of the people that are really in the driving seat of the Brexit position.
These fears, John Linden, of we've seen a couple of explosives in Derry. These fears of a return to the battle days of the Troubles. How real is it?
I think it's real. I think a generation has moved on from conflict, and luckily I think they have a different experience in the last generation than the ones that preceded it. But we have tens of thousands of former prisoners and paramilitaries, only 3% of whom have in any way reoffended since release from prison. But you've got a well of expertise with regards to engaging in paramilitary activities, and critically with the border arrangement. If we go down a no-deal route where a hard border is introduced, there's 300 border crossings between Northern Ireland and the Republic. And that gives them physical infrastructure to, first of all, target with regards to resentment, and then would have to be manned by British Army or police, maybe initially, personnel. And you can imagine ourselves very quickly, and people will calculate and plan for this, to create a reality where border communities are seeing troops on their ground again.
Sam Bradpeace, we're down now, again, 10 days. Could we sleepwalk into a no-deal Brexit?
There's actually a motion being pushed for in Parliament at the moment to get a legally binding agreement that says no deal could happen, i.e. a motion to make no deal an illegal option, which would be ideal as far as I'm concerned.
Would that fly? Just saying no deal? Would Brussels and the 27 others say okay, fine?
No, that would be a step, but there would need to be more. So I don't see exactly how Theresa May is going to handle the things tomorrow. But there is maybe the last chance is for her to reach an agreement with the Labour Party and with Jeremy Corbyn. And maybe the last chance is, if you look at the indicative votes of the last few days, you see that there has been more and more votes in favor of a customs union. And only 3 votes were missing yesterday evening.
Yeah, that's 1 or 2 MPs.
Yes. Yeah. And if finally this customs union, which was proposed by Kenneth Clarke, by the way, so a conservative, and which had the agreement of many Labour parliamentarians, if this agreement was passed, this would solve the issue of the Irish border. And that could be a way to find a solution out of this impasse, which is currently there. Although there are so many divisions still today among the British Parliament and even among the British people, I'm not sure this would mean that a majority of people would be happy with it.
Michael Northcott, would agreement on staying in the customs union go any ways towards preventing a no-deal Brexit?
Yes, I think it would solve the problem overnight. I mean, if you achieved a majority for one of the positions that was sort of vaguely, well, largely set out in the indicative votes, and then people coalesced around it with a clear majority.
And how would it go down in the court of public opinion?
A mandate. Absolutely terribly. I think people are very wary of any. Certainly, the 17.4 million people who voted to leave. They do their reading, lots of them. It may surprise people to learn. And they are not happy with the idea of a customs union, which would prevent us from pursuing an independent trade policy around the world, which is, of course, one of the benefits of leaving properly.
Would it be a betrayal?
Would
it be a betrayal of the referendum?
It depends if there is a way of extricating ourselves from the arrangement in the future. So it wouldn't be a full betrayal, no. But I think to take more and more of the benefits that can be achieved by leaving properly off the table is by degrees a betrayal. Yes.
Sam Brad, please.
We talk about this was promised to us by Liam Fox, the Trade Secretary, that after Brexit we would have countries around the world queuing up to get trade deals with the UK. The EU currently has 40 major trade deals with countries around the world. Britain so far has lined up 8. For the post-Brexit situation.
So the EU has not managed to do a trade deal with the United States or Canada, or only just with Canada, not with China. They're not very good at doing trade deals, actually. You should have a look at the list of who they've done them with.
Well, I see Britain is lining up Fiji and a couple of other small countries. I think if we want to talk about trading powers...
And the United States, yes.
Yeah, well...
the United States.
But Michael Northcott, that deal with the United States, some saying it would be not so great for the UK. Donald Trump would bargain hard. It'd be the introduction of hormone beef into the UK, this sort of thing. Is a trade deal of Britain on its own with the US in Britain's interest?
It really depends how well it's negotiated. But
what leverage would Britain have?
No tariff trade with the... It's the world's 5th largest economy. It's a significant economy on its own. It's worth 9. I heard a stat the other day, something along the lines of 9. The UK leaving the EU is approximate to 9 of the other countries' worth, the smaller countries of the EU, leaving together. So the idea that the UK is not a contender for proper trade arrangements around the world is just silly, absolutely silly.
Sorry, the risk that we face with a no-deal Brexit in particular is just a complete bonfire of any regulations, social and environmental, which are currently set by the EU. The UK's law is deeply interwoven with the EU law. And there is a risk, you mentioned beef, chlorinated chicken is another story we hear about all the time. I mean, yeah, that is a real risk.
Yeah.
Catherine Mathieu, do we downplay... Do we downplay the clout that the UK would have in trade negotiations?
No, I don't think so. I think that currently being in the European Union is the best position for the UK to negotiate, to trade with European partners and to also trade with the rest of the world. But if the UK is in a situation of having no more access to the single market of the European Union, I can understand that people in the UK say then we are going to try to trade deals with the rest of the world. But I think it would be very complicated for the UK to succeed.
Particularly, I think, because the world is moving into these blocks, economic and political, and the European Union remains the one, to the point about regulation, that is most rooted upon both social and environmental rights, but it's also the single biggest market in the world for goods and for access. And there's a political dimension to that. There's 2 permanent 5 Security Council seats inside the European Union. There's the ability, I think, for Britain to be able to combine with its European allies. And on foreign policy, it has driven the agenda maybe more than any single entity inside the European Union over the last 25 years.
At the Security Council.
Absolutely, and also in bilateral arrangements. And economics flows from that very often, where we see China becoming more authoritarian, the future of the United States being very much in flux at the moment. If I was a British citizen, I would prefer to be inside a liberal, prosperous bloc that can punch above its weight, rather than out on your own in the mid-Atlantic.
Michael Northcott, you convinced?
Absolutely not. That's just completely sidelines every democratic argument that it's possible to make about the European Union. I'm not convinced by the argument that the EU is any guarantor of prosperity. Has anyone had a look recently at what's going on in Greece? A problem that's been going for 10 years and shows no signs of abating. Germany is on the brink of a recession. France is pointing downwards at the moment. The EU is not a guarantor of good economic performance.
It's not a guarantor, but the UK was the fastest growing economy inside the European Union before it announced it was leaving, and now it's the slowest growing economy inside the European Union. So it clearly has some sort of...
It's not the slowest growing today.
It was, I think, in the last quarter of last year.
It's growing faster than Germany.
In the last quarter of last year, I think it had slowed.
And now isn't. So Brexit, but it's not like Brexit has completely undone the possibility of growth. Germany is now growing slower than us, and we're the ones who are supposed to be suffering all this economic fallout just from having voted to leave.
So is it the beginning of big blocks or the end of big blocks, Catherine Mathieu?
Difficult to answer this point, but I think that I would agree that it's difficult to say currently that the UK performs really less well than other economies in the euro area, and effectively in Germany we see really the economy really decelerating very rapidly. But even saying that, I think that the UK, being in the European Union, has an access to a big market, and this is reality, and we have to account of this, I think.
All right, one final point. We'll never be totally ready for a no-deal Brexit, warns Michel Barnier. We're as ready as can be, argues the UK's ambassador to France, Edward Llewellyn, who spoke to France 24's Catherine Nicholson.
The British government has been preparing, reaching out to over 145,000 businesses. There are 10,000 British civil servants working on Brexit. I think £4 billion has been spent on no-deal planning. So that planning is happening, and I know it's happening on this side of the channel. Our French colleagues are doing the same to try to, contain disruption as much as would be possible, but it would be far, far preferable to have an agreement and for Britain to leave with an agreement.
So working to contain disruption, Catherine Mathieu, how much disruption would no deal mean?
We don't know exactly, because there has been no Brexit before. So we have to imagine what would happen. And a number of measures have been taken in terms of ensuring that planes are going to be able to continue to fly, that trade is going to be able to continue, also the rights of citizens. Many measures have been implemented since, I would say, over the last 6 months. So really, it seems to me that both the European Union and the UK are ready to minimize the disruptions in terms of no deal. The big disruption probably would be for companies who have their process, let's say, in the automotive sector, for instance. Well, you have so many parts of a car which are being produced in different countries in the European Union, so that could be rather complicated to organize if there are tariffs and non-tariff barriers progressively implemented. My guess is that if, in case of no deal, both the UK and the European Union would try to find a solution to avoid too much disruption and would try to find an agreement anyway.
All right, we'll see how that goes and whether it can all go smoothly. Lots going to happen in the next 10 days. I want to thank you very much, Catherine Mathieu. I want to thank as well Michael Northcott for joining us from London. John Linden, Sam Bradpiece. Stay with us. Media Watch is next.